Today's episode, we're jumping right in. This is Chalk Talk, presented by Platform. Let's go. On today's episode of Chalk Talk, presented by Platform, we have on Aaron Horschig. Aaron, thanks for joining us.
Hey, thanks so much for having me on, guys.
He is also probably familiar to a lot of coaches and teachers out there with his Twitter handle, which is Squat U. It's got some great content and some great stuff. We're going to put that into the podcast description. But Aaron, why don't you start off there? How did you kind of get into the world of both promoting good form, technique, and all of those different things, and almost kind of branding yourself around this Squat U that's become so popular?
Definitely. So, I've always been a weight room minded person. I was one of those kids in high school that was always having to get kicked out of the weight room at 6:00 at night because, coach is leaving and going home. When I got to college, I really found Olympic weightlifting as sort of my path as far as continuing to compete once I was done with their traditional sports of football and baseball and whatnot. And I continued to compete in Olympic weightlifting all the way up until 2015, actually, recently. So over 10 years of that, and then sort of blended my experiences in coaching and competing in Olympic weightlifting with my career path in becoming a physical therapist. I've been a physical therapist out here in Kansas City now for over 7.5 years, just working with athletes of all ages, especially a ton of middle school and high school athletes out here. So that's probably the group of athletes that I really enjoy working with the most is, your high school football player, your middle school basketball player. We have a lot of fun out here in Kansas City working with that age group. But really where it sort of took a turn was when I first started working with athletes, and they would come into me with any sort of ache and pain, knee pain, hip pain, back pain. During our evaluation process, there'd always be a time where I would ask them, all right, take off your shoes. Let me see just a good quality squat. I want to see how you're moving. And time again, I would get these athletes that by all sense of the word were some of the biggest and strongest athletes of their school, right, of the area, but yet were having pain and could not perform a basic body weight squat.
Right.
Needless to say, there's no way they could do a single leg squat. They just looked horrible. And yet these athletes that were, amazing athletes doing things, that were taking them to the next level in college and even professional level eventually, they're having a problem in performing the most basic movements. Yet they're pushing 400 or 500 pounds in the squat in their high school weight room. So I was, what is going on here? It was sort of time and time again, I was seeing this recurring pattern.
Yeah.
And it was sort of dawned on me that, as a society, we've conceptually rearranged our idea that the squat by itself, among all other exercises, is an exercise first before it's a movement. We've sort of rearranged that idea that it's not a movement that we need to get down first before we do the exercise.
Right.
So that sort of was the catalyst that sort of drove me to start reaching out to people and being like, hey, here's the deal. We need to understand that we need to move well first before we move big weight.
Yeah.
And that's sort of where Squat University was born out of. So in 2015, I just started making a lot of content, all for free, and just giving it out to the world and being like, hey, here's the deal. You have a broken squat and your knee's caving in. Why is it caving in? Well, here's some simple tests that you can do at home, speaking to each and every person on a level that they can understand. Because nowadays we get these people that almost speak down to the common coach and athlete from their ivory tower. And they're very, very smart people, but they don't understand how to communicate with people. And then that's how the biggest change occurs. So if I'm taking that, that knowledge and that understanding from the higher level of, physical therapy world and strength and conditioning world from years of experience and research, and I can take it and I can simplify it and explain it to someone, a high school coach, a high school athlete, and they can understand how to fix the problems that they have in movement. It's not only going to decrease the aches and pains, decrease the risk of injury, help them recover from injury, but it's going to help them perform better, not only in the weight room, but eventually on their field of play, regardless of what type of sport they're doing, because they're going to be moving with better coordination, better stability, and more explosive power because they're moving from a better foundational point of movement.
Yeah.
So that's sort of where Squat University was born out of. And then from then it just sort of took off. I've just really tried to really be on every single social media platform and speak to as many people as I can, and really try to give away my best information all for free. So try to do things a little bit differently than I think the way the strength and conditioning community and just the world of physical medicine has been in the past, where really if you want to learn from someone, you have to pay. And they hide behind a firewall of like a $9.99 a month type of a website or something like that.
Sure.
I wrote my first book, The Squat Bible, that was published a couple years ago. But really, besides that, I don't have any other products. I don't have a paid website. Really, if you want my information, it's all there for free.
For sure. And we have Sam Breslin on the show as well today for those that are listening. And Sam, that seems to have rung true with you, just seeing what Aaron was talking about at the front end in terms of like, there are just so many great athletes that don't know how to do the most basic of basic things.
Yeah. And I just want to mention it's super cool to have you on. I've been a big fan for a long time. I think actually, your Twitter channel and YouTube channel has somewhat informed my own beliefs as a coach over the last few years. So I appreciate you being on here. It's very cool. And very much, I think you're spot on here because I think the reason that we started was because, spending as much time as I did with high school athletes, I was finding that, as you said, everybody cared about chasing weight, especially when it came to the high school football culture, right? It was I don't care. I just want to see how much you squat max. I want to see, I wanted to walk an athlete in for the first time, put a bar on their back and see what they can do. And it felt completely ass backwards to me. And it was something that, I wanted to reverse at my own school, which we've done very, very successfully. And it's very much a movement overload culture now. But then I was looking to see how can we kind of, change that, throughout. And I think thanks to people like yourself, I mean, would you agree that we as a kind of a community has at least somewhat shifted towards this whole idea that movement does matter more, and now people are starting to focus on foundational movement patterns, fixes, faults, and everything along those lines? Do you think we're still fighting that battle in most places, or where do you think things have come lately?
That's a great question. I mean, I think it's always going to be a battle because we are sort of battling the old culture. I mean, I remember when I was an intern at the University of Missouri, working with their strength and conditioning staff. I mean, and this is something, the numbers came from the head coach of the football team. That like, I need this many players cleaning this much. I need this many players squatting this much. I need this many players deadlifting this much. And when you put those arbitrary numbers on something like that, you totally throw out the idea of movement quality. And as a football player, what do I care about? I care about how they're performing on the field. Sure, being able to clean is very, very helpful because it's an explosive movement. In order to clean big weight, you have to have good quality coordination of movement, stability, very explosive power. But just putting an arbitrary number as that is my marker for saying that that person can then perform on the field, there's a huge disconnect because there's a lot of players. I was actually blown away because I came from Eureka High School in St. Louis, Missouri. And I feel like we were very blessed to have a great coaching staff. When we walked into our weight room, I mean, this is 2000. I graduated in 2005 from high school. So I started getting into the weight room around 2001. We had, maybe when you walked in the weight room, like 10 platforms, Alico weightlifting plates and bars, like bumper plates. Like there weren't many high schools, at least in the St. Louis area, that had that capability. So we were taught how to clean from a very early age. I remember starting to do power cleans when I was, in 8th grade. When I got to the college level and I'm seeing some of these athletes as an intern, now these athletes are, on a Division I college football team. Yet some of these kids have never been shown how to perform a power clean. So you're telling me that athlete has to hit this certain number in this very, very technique-orientated movement as your marker of whether or not they're, qualified to play on the field. Right. So I think we're starting to see this change where we're saying, hey, yes, the weight room matters for sure. And I need to see good quality strength because the quality of someone's strength and power production in the weight room has a direct carryover to how they're going to play on the field. But it has to be based first in good quality movement. If someone's cleaning 300 pounds and their form just looks like complete crap, how is that athlete going to take that movement quality and the coordination, strength, and stability that they're learning from that and applying it onto the field? It's not going to be applied very well. I'd much rather take that athlete and say, hey, we're going to work on your technique, but I'm going to give you maybe something a little bit different. Let's do like an explosive, like sandbag throw or a medicine ball throw. And like Dr. Brian Mann, he was at the University of Missouri for a while. Now he's down in Florida. He's a big proponent of saying like, hey, the Olympic lifts are great, but I don't need every football athlete necessarily to do the Olympic lifts because it's a very, very technical lift. And there's a lot of learning that goes into that. So in my short time window that I have with 60 athletes at a time, do I need to be spending that much time learning bar control and speed and stuff like that when I could be being more efficient with something else? As far as movement quality, I think we're slowly coming around to understanding that movement has to come first. In that someone comes in and squats 800 pounds in a quarter rep squat. I want to see someone take it, down to full depth and that look powerful and good coordination. That's what I'm looking for, because that's going to carry over to better quality functional life and a better quality athletic life in whatever athletic pursuit you're going through.
Right. And I think what's fun to watch with a lot of the videos you post are those high level Olympic lifters. You watch slow-mo as they're moving through their positions, and it is so technically sound because that's what they're spending their entire life doing at that point, right? And so I think a lot of times when we start to talk about Olympic lifts with different athletes and things like that, it's like, no, you don't have to spend the amount of time so that you're getting that one rep max. You can kind of work backwards, use it as a movement, use it as a range of motion, get the exercise down, and not necessarily have to be like, we have to get you to the point where we get a number, which I think is great.
And so I'd be interested because it's funny you say that because, our Division I football team that I played on was identical to what you just mentioned, right? So, and this was an actual quote by an assistant coach after they fired our strength and conditioning coach for lack of attention to numbers when they said, it's not that complicated, just move heavy weights. And that's why that's why they fired him. So my question to you is, and this is something that we get, asked to us about how to field is, if you need to go convince somebody that is of that mindset, what is your best, I guess, sell? What do you use the most? Is it, hey, we want to keep the kids are only, good athletes for you if they are on the field, AKA healthy, and, safety is the thing? Or is it to your point of, movement quality actually makes you a better athlete from a, performance standpoint? Do you have like a go-to for that coach that's just, I don't care, I just want to move heavy weights? Or is it one of a lot of things?
That's really tough. It's very tough to convince someone who's very set in their ways. You know what I'm saying? And I'll say,
yes, I do.
old football coaches are some of the worst because that's how they've done it for years and it's worked for them and they've won football games. So who are you to tell them what to do differently? So it's very tough. I think it almost has to be something that like it starts from the youth, and then those young coaches get into the game, and then eventually when they become head coaches, then we see that slow change in culture.
Sure.
It's going to be tough. I mean, they say it's tough for an old dog to learn new tricks kind of thing. Like, I think it's going to be rare to find a coach who's been in the game for a long time to all of a sudden go, you know what, I am okay with us changing up our weight room requirements. I think the big thing that you'll see is, unfortunately, it'll take injuries, I think, for something like that to be a big, punch in the face of, hey, we need to change this up. When you're seeing more and more athletes get injured because they're focusing so much only on strength and not on the quality of movement, they're not, I think when you fail to move well and move well with big weight, you're going to set yourself up for eventual injury risk. Now, I'm not saying there's a direct connection, like if someone moves like this, they're going to for sure get injured on the field of play. But I'll say if someone has better quality of movement and they can load in, they have the capacity to tolerate more load through full quality of movement, that's going to carry over onto the field, I think, and you're going to see decreased risk of injury. So I think, when you change up what you're doing in the weight room and you're really taking into account, working the body in multiple planes of motion, you're not just doing the big three. You're not just squat, deadlift, bench, right? I think you're changing up how you're training the athlete to not only do the Olympic lifts, but to do explosive lifts in multiple planes of motion, doing lateral lunges, doing single leg lifts, single leg RDLs, lateral bounding, things like that. I think that's going to carry over much more in the field of play. And we can see this in research when we look at like things like risk of ACL tear. We see these plans that are put in that are meant to help reduce risk of ACL tears. And they found that these types of plans that work on coordination, stability, balance, single leg landing, depth drop landings, those things have a direct carryover to decrease risk of injury tears, you know, like, or severe injuries like ACL tears.
Sure. And I want to go back to what you almost started this whole episode on, because it's a really great point. You've talked about different movements. You've talked about different things to incorporate. We get a lot of questions and a lot of people saying, you know, I don't get them. I'm never starting from scratch. And obviously you get people a lot of times that are to the point where you're doing those screenings. Like you said, let's take off your shoes. Let's see what we're doing. You know, most coaches and teachers are getting kids that are showing up to their class or their weight room with bad habits.
Yes.
Somewhere along the way, they've set those up. So, you know, when you get someone new or you have someone show up for the first time, especially that middle school or high school athlete, what are the first things that you're looking for to kind of, in a better word, screen them? And then what are some of those first basic things that you're introducing or incorporating so that you're kind of setting them up and then moving forward, knowing that it's not a blank slate?
That's a great question. The first thing we have to do is when an athlete comes to you, is you have to just do basic movement screens to sort of uncover what that individual athlete needs to work on. Now, everyone's going to be a little bit different, and there's a number of different screens out there that can be helpful. Like the FMS is a very simple screen that a lot of people have been using, and I don't have a problem with that at all. I think it's a great way for a strength and conditioning coach to run a number of athletes through a very systematic, objective way of looking at movement and then discovering what does this athlete then need to work on. When I was at Mizzou, I mean, we were able to run, I remember one time we ran like, it must have been over 100 athletes through the FMS in an hour or two. Like, it was crazy how we were able to set up, you know, step, and just knock out a bunch of different screens. And then you have all this objective measurement, which is able to allow you to then assess and individually program, hey, this athlete failed this screen. They need to be doing these type of exercises as a part of their training program. And I think that's very, very helpful when you're able to do that. The first things I think you got to do, which is one of the FMS screens, is just a simple body weight squat. Get someone out of their shoes. So many people today never take time out of their shoes. They're always in shoes, and they completely forget about what their feet are doing, and just watch them do a squat. See what it looks like. How deep can they go? Where do their knees point? What are their feet doing? And just basic assessment. Every single person needs to be able to perform a great looking deep body weight squat. It doesn't matter if you're a 320-pound lineman on the football team or the wide receiver or the kicker. You should be able to do a great looking deep body weight squat. Now, perfect will look a little bit different to each person because we have different mobility, anatomy. I mean, you take a look around the weight room. No two people are built the exact same. So perfect is going to look a little bit different. What we're looking for is what is optimal. And what is optimal is the hip crease below the top of the knee. I want the feet in a good stable tripod position. I don't want to see those feet collapse over. I want the knees in line with the feet. I don't want the back rounded over like someone's got a turtle shell on their back. I want their back in a fairly neutral position. And I want to see balance and coordination. They should be able to squat all the way down. With those prerequisites, that person can then start loading the squat. So I think, you know, some people take things out of context like, oh, if this person doesn't have a perfect squat like Lu Xiaoxun from, you know, the Chinese weightlifting team, I can never load them. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying we have to hit these objective optimal factors for us then to start loading. I see a lot of kids in the weight room that are loading a back squat and it looks like complete crap. And I'm like, that athlete's not ready, unfortunately, to start squatting. They're going to get much more out of working on just a bodyweight squat or maybe loaded like in a goblet squat, but they need to be doing things that fit within their capacity. Because if you push someone to perform a lift, for example, having an athlete perform a heavy power clean and they can't front squat yet, what are we doing? We're going way too far past that athlete's capacity. What you're doing is you're just loading a problematic movement pattern, which is then going to then lock that type of movement into their brain as far as how their body's moving. Sort of their, you know, their optimal movement pattern then becomes sort of changed because they're teaching themselves how to move that way. How do you think they're going to move on the field of play? If they have to jump and land and get pushed off balance, how do you think they're going to land if they're squatting and their knees caving in with a simple slow movement in the weight room?
Right, and
So
I think that goes back to what Sam, you had mentioned earlier in terms of, we can't always convince an old dog of new tricks, but that's the type of stuff where it's like, if they can't do it in the weight room in a controlled environment, are they going to be able to do it in a field of play? I think that, to me, is what I've always used as an argument. Like, if you can't do it now, when we are setting you up, super basic, how's it going to happen when you got someone shoving you or you got, people all around you, all of those different types of things. I like that example a ton.
And actually, that you bring that up, that's another thing. How I will often convince the coach, how I will convince the athlete that the way which I'm trying to go about things is better. When you talk to an athlete, especially a young athlete, you never say, hey, this will help you decrease your risk of injury. Because that athlete, that doesn't connect with them. They're 16 years old. They don't give a crap what you're talking about injury. They haven't been injured. They haven't torn their ACL. You saying, hey, this will decrease that risk of a torn ACL. They're like, dude, you have no idea what you're talking about. I'm thinking about playing Fortnite right now and then getting on the field to play. Like, they don't care about injury risk. But you tell them, hey, if we go about doing this and fix that movement and have you be crisp and clean with that power clean, that's going to help you jump, add 5 more inches onto your vertical jump. You're going to be able to have that much more power into a tackle, which is going to allow you to be that much of a better linebacker. Now you're connecting with their performance mindset. And that's what the athlete thinks about. Right. So you can also take that and try to convince a coach, hey, that 300-pound deadlift that you want this kid to have, that's not going to carry over necessarily to a better a better player on the defensive line. But if I can get this kid to power clean with better technique, they're going to be that much more explosive into that tackle. Sometimes that can connect with them a little bit more. But again, that's sort of that old dog, new tricks. Sometimes it's tough for the head coach that's been in the game for a long time. But when you can connect with that athlete on their performance mindset, now you're integrating what you want. You're integrating that move first mindset.
Yep.
And as a side effect, they're going to get the decreased injury risk. But in their mind, they're there for performance. So you're able to sort of change their mindset or their way of going about things by connecting with their mindset.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So at the risk of going a little too tangential and detailed, but I had a question when you were talking about movement patterns and squats and whether or not to load it and increase intensity. Very specific thing that I actually had I've always had every year, but this year was probably by far and away the most frequently seen was athletes that have already been drilled and taught proper movement mechanics unloaded. And then all of a sudden as sophomores in high school, I had like 6 kids growth spurts of like 6 inches. And then all of a sudden the ankle range of motion was through the floor and they could no longer perform all of the movement patterns that they thought they could. So I guess twofold question, one, how do you go about addressing something like that when it's kind of basically been shot in the middle of like a normal teaching progression? Do you regress? Do you fix for, the ankle range of motion, specifically? And then also, how do you, tell that athlete to go about doing whatever it is that you are asking them to change?
Yeah, I think the big mindset that you have to take is we want to train what we can train while we fix what we can fix. So it's sort of a give and take. So let's say you have that athlete that had that huge growth spurt, mobility's gone to the shitter. What do we do now? First things first, let's have a little bit more detailed warm up. That's going to address those mobility restrictions. So, things that are great for that, like a deep goblet squat stretch and then shifting those knees over the toes to really work that ankle mobility, that can be huge. And just also sort of, as much as you can, individualizing our warm-ups and our training. Now, obviously, when you have 60 people in the weight room at the same time, that's a little tough. But you can have, groups 1, 2, 3. Groups 1, you're good. Mobility is good. Technique is good. I don't need to be giving you that many cues. You're off doing this plan. Group 2, we have some mobility restrictions. You guys have this warm-up. And, hey, your training program isn't full-depth squats. We're going to do box squats for the next couple weeks. For them, they're just thinking, oh, I'm group 2, we're doing box squats. And in that case, they can load up the squat, but you're also minimizing their depth to something that they can do with good quality technique. Sure. And again, as a football player in that short term, they're going to get benefit from a loaded squat within a range of motion that they can control with good quality technique. And again, I'm not talking to an Olympic weightlifter, so I don't need them squatting ass to grass all of the time loaded. I want to get as much out of that weight room session as possible so that it can improve their strength, their coordination, their functional mobility in a way that carries over to the field. So loading maybe a back squat into a box in that short time frame while they're doing mobility work to fix their ankle mobility, maybe something that allows you to train what you can train while you fix what you can fix.
Sure. So, I mean, I've seen a lot of coaches do this. Would you then also say that a viable strategy would be then to maybe elevate an athlete's heel so that they can maintain a proper positioning in a full depth squat? Or is that a Band-Aid to allow you to load something that's not quite there yet?
That's a great question. And that goes back to the whole, like, are weightlifting shoes okay to wear? My big thing is I want to first expose mobility problems and movement problems first with body weight movement. So if someone can't do a deep body weight squat without any shoes on, that's first we exposed, all right, mobility issue, probably at the ankles. Let's do like a 5-inch wall test and see what we find. Yep. That person, if you exposed it, all right, they know every single day they're in the weight room, they have ankle mobility work to do, and they need to also try to pattern it in a body weight movement. Because if you can't get all the way down, football shoes don't have, or football cleats don't have a raised heel.
Right.
You need to be able to get all the way down with your football cleats on and be able to sit down as deep as possible. So your warm-up is going to consist of ankle mobility work, whether that's some stretching or foam rolling, and then sitting down in that deep goblet squat to try to expose that full range of motion. My big thing is always, when it is time to pick up the barbell, I want you to perform to your greatest capabilities. And I don't want you to have to necessarily push into a mobility restriction that's going to hinder your movement quality. So weightlifting shoes were designed for a reason. It allows Olympic weightlifters to get into even better technical positions for their lifts. The greatest Olympic lifters in the world don't have mobility restrictions. They've got great ankle mobility. But they're still wearing weightlifting shoes. They're not going out on the stage wearing Chucks. You know what I'm saying? So there's a reason why they wear weightlifting shoes. So it's going to allow them to get into an even more chest up trunk position for the reception of the clean or snatch. So for a football player that comes into me and he's got ankle mobility restrictions, I would say, here's our warm up. You're working on your ankle mobility. You're sitting in a deep goblet squat without shoes on so we can prime that full pattern. Then we go to the weight room. It's time to pick up the barbell. You've got front squats today. Your mobility still isn't great. Let's put some weightlifting shoes on. I'm completely fine with that because it's going to allow you to load a pattern and get into a deep position and with good technique. So I'm definitely okay with using weightlifting shoes for that application. I don't think it's not going to hinder ankle mobility. It's not going to decrease it anymore. That's another thing. People think that wearing weightlifting shoes decreases your ankle range of motion. It doesn't at all. It just changes and manipulates your positioning. Right. But the big thing is it only is a Band-Aid if you don't recognize the problem and also address the problem. Fair. So that's the thing is I'll get a lot of Olympic weightlifters that will come into me and they never squat without their shoes on. Like they're never in a deep body weight squat throughout their day without shoes on. So they have no idea that they have limited ankle mobility in that it's a problem. So if you wear weightlifting shoes when you're barbell training, I have no problem with it because it's going to help you get into better technical positions. But understand that there has to be mobility screening first, expose the problem, fix the invisible issue so that we then can carry over to what we're trying to do in the long term, which is good quality body weight movements for the field of play.
Sure. Right. For sure. Well, we are running up on time. We're going to just take a quick break so we can kind of reset. So sit tight. We'll be right back with Aaron Horschig. All right. So we're taking a quick break with Aaron Horschig. If you want to check out more, you can always come to platform.com. That's PLT4M.com. We have tons of great content, things like Aaron was talking about in terms of different mobility drills, exercises. But Aaron, where else should people go to check out the stuff that you're putting out?
Yeah, check out Squat University all across the internet on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, Snapchat, squatuniversity.com, YouTube. I also have the Squat University podcast as well. So all across the internet, any single social media platform that you are on, I am also on.
All right, great. And he also has a full-time job, so it's amazing how he juggles all of it.
That's true.
With that, we'll jump back into the show. All right, we're jumping back in with Aaron. Aaron, thanks again for joining us today on Chalk Talk. This has been a pleasure to have you.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure to be on, guys.
So we were talking a lot on the first half of the episode and kind of harping away on breaking things down and being really solid with form, technique, and everything else like that. We spent a little bit of time talking about weightlifting shoes and things like that. So I'll kick it over to you, Sam, because I know shoes of all things are something that comes up, especially with high school kids all the time. So
yeah, the footwear that is being brought into the weight room, especially lately, has gotten to be, I call it, relatively outrageous as it pertains to training. The soft, wide-based heels that have almost no stability whatsoever. It becomes a big problem. So I was wondering if you would just mind kind of talking about what is the proper approach to footwear in the gym as it pertains to squatting or any other movement, so that it's something that we can then kind of dictate to our athletes, so that we minimize the potential for footwear to ruin a workout that has no business doing so.
Definitely. I'll say the first thing I always tell my athletes is that running shoes have no place in the weight room. Those sweet Ultra Boosts you see people wearing, outside should never be used in the weight room. They are horrible for the weight room. It's basically like squatting on top of a marshmallow. It's not stable at all. Go out to your local Famous Footwear and get a $25 pair of Chuck Taylors. They will be much better for you in the weight room than any type of running shoe or classic, casual shoe. When we go into the weight room, what we're looking for is in every single lift is to have a stable connection to the floor. And that means we want a hard sole heel. So either that's going to be a weightlifting shoe that has a very hard sole, non-flexible shoe or heel that is either made of wood or like a composite plastic, or like a classic powerlifting shoe like a Chuck Taylor that's just a hard rubber sole. Whenever you have a running shoe, the goal of the running shoe is to have that thick heel that's very, very flexible. It's either going to be a cushion or like an air bubble like you may see in like a Nike Air Max. Mm-hmm. And the reason for that is because a lot of people, when they run, they have a heel strike. And whenever your heel hits the ground, that cushion is there to help distribute force to the rest of your foot and up your body so that it takes off some of the force of that impact. Well, when we're squatting, deadlifting, performing a clean, benching with your full foot on the ground, we want that full foot connection. We want our body weight spread evenly across the full foot so that we can maintain a stable base of foundation. If you look at like a house being built on a solid, firm foundation or a house built on sand, which one of those are going to stand up the next time a hurricane blows through? Mm-hmm. Clearly the one where the house is built on a solid, firm foundation of concrete. Well, that's the same thing if you look at someone squatting in a pair of weightlifting shoes or a pair of Chuck Taylors with a hard, firm rubber sole or a pair of Ultra Boost running shoes. Right. It's completely different as far as the stability derives. So I will always tell my athletes, and a lot of times people say, well, I don't have any money. And I'm like, you just spend $130 on a pair of Ultra Boost running shoes. Literally go pay. Chuck Taylors are $25. Weightlifting shoes, sure, they're a little bit more expensive. But I'll tell you this, nowadays you can definitely find a pair of weightlifting shoes that are less than $100 and they will not wear out. Yeah. I've literally worn every pair of weightlifting shoes that I've had for over 3 years. And that's 5 to 6 days a week of intense training. Sure. And even then, the reason I got new pairs of shoes is because I wanted a new pair of shoes. It's not because they wore out necessarily. Like, they will last for a long time. If you are a strength and conditioning coach for a high school and you live in an area where maybe the kids don't have a lot of money to go and buy new shoes, I mean, I know it's tough. I know a lot of coaches put a lot of their own time and money into their gym, going out and getting a couple pairs of Chuck Taylors or finding some weightlifting shoes that you can find on the cheap, and then just keeping those as weightlifting shoes in the gym that will stay there year after year. I mean, my weightlifting team in college, we had about 10 pairs of weightlifting shoes that were just gym shoes. And when new athletes came in, they didn't have a pair of shoes. Hey, we got a pair of 7s or 8s over here. Try those on. Let's see. Those are going to be the pairs that you're going to use. And then, I mean, you make the best of it. But to have an athlete squat in running shoes is one of the worst things you can do because it's extremely unstable. And sure. just because you see some dude on Instagram squatting 800 pounds in running shoes doesn't mean you should be doing that as well.
I wish that was something that we get everybody to understand about all the things we see on Instagram. Out of curiosity, how do you feel about like the Metcons or Nanos or anything that's kind of a blend? Is that still kind of running the risk of the instability issues, et cetera?
I think it's a step in the right direction. So a Metcon or a Nike or a Reebok Nano, they are a small heel drop, like maybe like a 4 millimeter. So it's relatively a flat sole shoe.
Mhm.
It's not as firm of a surface as like a Chuck Taylor, but it does
Sure.
have a little bit more lateral stability. So it's a step in the right direction.
Okay. Yeah.
It's great. The reason they were developed for the functional fitness community, for like, CrossFit and whatnot, is because athletes would be like doing deadlifts and then jumping straight to box jumps and then going
Right.
and running a mile. So in those type of workouts, they give a little bit more versatility
Sure.
than using a weightlifting shoe. So I think it's a step in the right direction, much better than your classic running shoe.
Gotcha.
Right. I will say in college, I had like 12 millimeter. I was like I might as well have been on high heels trying to lift. And then I switched over to that. And it was definitely, for lack of a better word, a step in the right direction. So that's not a bad plug, but I think good, also practical, just in terms of talking about, not everybody has to go out and buy the $150 pair of shoes.
Yeah.
You can find some cheap and affordable ways. So this has been a great episode. I want to wrap up with a question that I had a lot because, working with athletes, I'm setting them up. I get an hour and a half with them. And I say, here are some things you can be doing on your own. Here are some things that you can be working on when you're not with the team or you're not with Aaron or Coach Brez or whoever you're with. What do you have in your arsenal of things that kids can be working on if they're not always there for the, hour that they're with you, to say, this is going to have the best bang for your buck if you only have 10, 15 minutes when you're sitting at home or you're doing your homework or before dinner, things like that?
Really, my biggest bang for your buck, and people are going to go, oh yeah, it's Squat University. Sit in a deep squat. Sit in a deep body weight squat. That is one thing that I see that athletes over their years, as they get older and older, they lose that ability to just perform a deep body weight squat. If you can do that, what do you have to have? Good ankle mobility, good hip and pelvic control, sufficient core stability so that you don't fall over, and good balance. That is going to carry over and set the foundation for so many other movements and athletic pursuits. If you want to clean, if you want to deadlift, how do you get down to the deadlift bar? You have to perform somewhat of a hinge and squat. There's so many specific things that a squat sets the fundamental movement for, that if you are missing that building block, it's going to set you up for decreases in performance and increase in injury risk. So sitting in a deep bodyweight squat throughout your day would be my one thing. It doesn't require, I don't need you foam rolling, and then you don't need equipment. Just sit down in a deep bodyweight squat. Be able to do that for a minute or two. It will have dramatic effects on the way in which you feel and the way in which you're moving throughout your life.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Sam, you got anything else?
No, that's great.
Well, that's certainly some great takeaways, I think, for coaches and teachers alike that are listening. There's some really basic things that we can kind of just go back to. And like you mentioned, we don't have to always overcomplicate things or anything else like that. We can, as simple as, is every kid where they need to be in that bodyweight squat? It sounds super basic, but something from your description, Aaron, has not lost its weight in gold when you're working with different people from all age ranges. It sounds to me.
Yep.
Sure.
I mean, it's simple. It's move well first, then move big weight, and if we can get our athletes to adopt better movement patterns, specifically in a squat, it's going to carry over to much better movement on the field of play, and improve performance and decrease injury risk, because they're moving from a better fundamental base of movement.
Yeah.
Movement matters most. I'm into it.
For sure. Well, thanks again, Aaron. We appreciate you coming on to the podcast. If you want to check out his stuff, like we mentioned during the break, you can go find it anywhere on any platform at Squat University. Go check out our stuff at platform.com as well. We'll share out this podcast as well as lots of other stuff that we have cooking. So thanks again, Aaron. We appreciate it. And remember, at Platform, we're always in pursuit of better.